Welcome to Full Throttle Talk, the podcast where horsepower meets conversation. From supercars to classic legends, high revving tech to motorsport mayhem, we cover it all. Straight from the driver's seat, whether you're a gearhead or racer or just love the thrill of the open road, you're in the right place. Buckle up, hit the gas, and let's go full throttle into today's episode. Welcome back. It's Full Throttle Talk with Greg and Paul, and we've got a fantastic show for you today. We have a lot of good topics. We're going to be talking about the auctions. Greg's been all over the place in the auctions. Paul's got some fantastic stories to share with us about some of his recent Porsche dealings. You guys can see he's teasing all of us with his pictures of his 911s he has for sale in the background. And don't you think he doesn't know what he's doing? I happen to know he's trying to sell me that green car. In any event, so guys, let's get rolling. If you don't mind, Greg, I really want to hear from you. You've been at the auctions. It's the start. You're obviously one of the nation's leading auction reps. Tell me, what are you seeing happening in the marketplace? What are some of the standout sales you've seen? I'm just really curious. We haven't talked in a week, and I've been getting messages from you wanting to share us different stories. So let's hear it. What are you seeing?
Well, it seems like it's going to be a really good year from a pricing perspective. People are excited. People are buying cars. We just had a couple of the huge sales. We had that Mercedes Streamliner that sold in Germany for like $53 million all in, which is absolutely nuts. And that's quite a car. I did cover it on my podcast a couple weeks ago with an expert. And then we had the 250 LM sell for a record price. I think it was, all in about $34 million. What a iconic car. Really different cars, because the Mercedes is such a preserved car. Basically it raced and then it went into the Indy Museum. And so like everything, the hoses, the belts, the tires was all from 1955, 56. Not a car you can really necessarily drive, right? Because you want to preserve that originality of the car. But the 250 LM, there's tons of videos out there of this thing being driven around and stuff. And what a car. It achieved expectations. I know RM had a really strong retromobile sale. As far as outside of RM, because I'm a consultant, as you know, so I do look at kind of everything going on out there. I know Broad Arrow just had a pre-war sale out in California that went surprisingly well, considering a lot of folks are not buying pre-war stuff, so you think about that age demographic. And I don't know that it was young people buying these cars. I did watch a live stream piece of it for a little bit, and it definitely was not a young crowd in the room, but everything was trading. People were definitely spending money. So obviously Amelia's in Miami, Motor Miami's happening. Amelia's happening. So we have the auctions down in Florida. I'm really curious to see how all that shakes out here. I think it's going to be stronger than people expect. So it'll be really interesting to see what trends we see from that and what's selling and what's not selling,
So I'm curious about that Mercedes. Wasn't that Mercedes part of the collection and like the Indy collection or something? Isn't that the reason?
Indianapolis Motor Speedway Museum. Yeah.
That's what I thought. And so that's the reason the car was basically preserved, bubble wrapped as it originally was. Do you have any insight, or are you allowed to say who bought that?
No, I can't ever share any of that unless it comes out publicly on their own, So, and okay. I don't have, like, if you held my feet to a fire right now, I don't have a clue, like I could call somebody and ask them, hey, I actually talked to one of my coworkers yesterday and I just asked him what country did it land in, and he didn't know. So, I'll share when I can, but honestly, that's very rare. Now we do have at the Moto Miami show, we have, I think it's 11 other cars or 9 other cars. Incredible. We've got the Corvette SS, which was a styling, race car mule from Duntov. We've got, a Ford GT40 that ran period races, just crazy stuff. And the car that really threw me for a loop was a 1908 Mercedes. This Mercedes has a 17.5 liter engine. And I had an expert, Evan Ide, who's an RM Sotheby's car specialist. He was gushing over this thing like I could not believe. And when I had him on the podcast, he talked about basically this car was 10 years ahead of every other car on the racetrack. It like blew the doors off of everything. So if I'm not a pre-war guy, I don't think you guys are pre-war guys, but apparently the S1 of this car is like $7 to $9 million, because the big leader cars pre-war that are very significant never trade hands publicly. And so in Moto Miami, I asked for a ride in this thing because it is an absolute beast. And if you look at it, you're going to call it a chitty chitty bang bang car. A lot of people, if they don't know what it is, they call it a chitty chitty bang bang car. That's exactly what it looks like. But man, apparently this thing is so insane that I'm like, I have to go for a ride in this thing.
Well, this is going to be a similar question I have for Paul too. So like I'm a car enthusiast, so I'm just always interested in all this stuff. I mean, this is really if I wasn't if I'm not doing normal work stuff, I'm definitely focusing on the car hobby. I might as well be in the car business, but I'm not. So I think from an enthusiast perspective, I'm kind of curious. So if someone's buying one of those chitty chitty bang bang cars like you just described, are they a new, like that's a collector for the most part. That's not someone that's going to be taking it from the track and doing, gymkhanas. So that's someone that's going to, collect it, drive it occasionally in rallies. Is that person, are the buyers for those things new buyers? Or are they people that are adding their existing collections? Do you have any perspective on that?
I mean, for me, I have found that, first of all, I think it's funny when you ask someone at like at a car event where you think, they have a pre-war car, if they're really into it, where it's all about pre-war, they usually ask me which war. Um,
Wow. My
and
1990 pre-Gulf War.
well, no, I'm thinking they're thinking World War I or World War II.
Oh, okay.
But, and I assume most, I would say, think of pre-World War II. What I've found is most of the people who are into pre-World War II, it's typically 20s and early 30s cars. And for the most part, they have other collections with Porsches and Ferraris. But those buyers I have found are number one, event oriented. So they bought like a pre-war Bentley, to go on specific Bentley events, rallies and things like that. And they really like using them. And I think on the other end, they have done so many different events. I always just say they're looking for a harder drug. They've done Porsches, they've done Ferraris, classy track stuff, and now the amazing thing is when I talk to these guys who, especially 20s Bentleys, which were basically Le Mans cars of the era, they it's like that trumps everything else that they're interested in. Like when they just get down that lane and they just go hard down that lane. And when you look at the values, and Greg, you would know better about this, and you look at the pre-war Bentleys, how expensive they've got because they're event focused.
Yeah, you're right. In pre-war Bentleys, what's cool about those, and I'm not a Bentley expert, but I know that those folks, they brag about the miles they drive. It's not a preservation thing. They don't care as much about if it's not the original engine or body panels. Those are all swapped back in period. And so you go look at the Bentley boys with their racing successes. Like the Bentley folks, they're out there when it's raining and doing 50 on a country road. I mean, they're really respectable what they do. They're not about preserving, they're about enjoying and driving. And I would be shocked if whoever buys that Mercedes, 7 to 9, if they're under 70, I will have a heart attack. I just don't think, I think that's a car probably a lot of mega collectors have been wanting for 30 years. It hasn't been, I mean, it went into the museum. I don't know when, but like in the 50s. I mean, it just has not been available. I think the last time a car of that caliber sold was over 25 years ago. So, I don't think that's a 20-year-old, Silicon Valley person trying to buy it. It'll be really interesting to see, even when I'm down, in the room and people are bidding, I'm curious to see who's bidding on that car.
So let me ask you guys a question. We're in this era now where new cars, with the exception of probably GT Porsches, and there's probably some others, but I can't think of them, are depreciating. The new Ferraris are depreciating. That hasn't happened since I can't even know I don't even know when that started. Has that ever happened in mid-engine V8 Ferraris where they've depreciated, where they haven't at least held MSRP? I mean, can you guys think of a time? I can't. So that's happening now. So just, so a 2 or 3 year old, 296 GTB is selling for MSRP or even less. And so I'm curious, at the same time, you guys are saying some of these collector cars, and Paul, you're dealing more of a less collector cars for sure, but you're also selling primarily to enthusiasts. Are people deciding to migrate from the newer stuff? And is it one of the reasons they're migrating to the newer stuff, other than the experience, because they don't want to take the financial ass kicking that sometimes is being experienced? I mean, what's going on right now? Why are, I'm sure, Greg's interpretation of what's going on in the markets as far as the auction season and what you said, I'm sure it makes sense that, the market's going to do great this year, but at the same time, the new car, they aren't doing great. So how does that balance out?
I mean, for me, I find that I'm rarely dealing with anything that's newer than 5, even 10 years. It's usually, a little older than that. And for the most part, I think the newer buyer got like a new GT3 or something or whatever it is, BMW, and they like the brand so much that now they're an enthusiast and they're like, okay, what else is out there that's a little bit older? I think the depreciation is a big part of it. They look at a 20-year-old, like a 997, and they just don't seem to go down. In fact, when you look at Porsche specifically, they sort of have this trend where it's if it's a 911 for the first 7 years, it sort of depreciates on its own, 7, maybe up to 10 years. And then it's just miles and condition after that. But when anything that has a G on the back end, it suddenly is like 5 years and it stops. Or, the pandemic was weird because it just stopped instantly. But now that I think things are not getting back to normal, but shifting a bit, I'm looking at GT3s, like 991.2 GT3 manual coupes that were all over 200, whether it's a touring or a wing car. You can get them for in the 160s. And I think
So just so that was basically what the original MSRP on the 991.2 GT3. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe was what you just said, or if not a little bit less. And so you're talking about something that has taken this long to go back down to
well,
MSRP.
but I think right now what's happened is also inflation has changed that. Because if you look at the value of a new GT3 compared to the value of the new GT3 in 2018, it's I don't know, 30% more, 40% more,
At least, yeah.
at least.
No, it's more than 30%. I mean, someone needs to go online and find out what the
MSR,
MSRP.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, so like a new GT3 manual wing car is probably, what is it, 280?
Yeah,
Just
exactly. Right.
and it was 160. So it's gone up a lot more. So I think to some degree, um, the MSRPs were you can't look at like old MSRPs even 5 years ago. You have to look at them maybe 2 years ago. A 992.1 versus 992.2. But I think that price, I think what they say, it went up 30 grand for essentially the same car, 992.1 to 2.
Well, will be interesting to see what happens because Porsche just did a very significant price increase. It'll be interesting to see if that washes out, or what happens with overages and whatnot. I think the new cars just being delivered now, or maybe delivered later this year, those are the ones where they have the $40,000 price increase. But we'll have to see about that. Yeah, but
We
that's
need to. I think we should dig into the new Ferrari stuff, not necessarily this episode, but because I want to do some more homework. But I think that is a real thing you're talking about there, Tim. And it's interesting because is it transitioning to hybrids? Is that the impact? Is it the impact of the design of the cylindre, or however you pronounce it? Is it the massive amount of competition in the space that's out there right now? Because it is really interesting. I mean, I've been trying to find a LaFerrari, privately for a little while, and that's a hard car to find. And I did find like an Aperta, but the numbers on it are insane. I mean, the number is like $6.5 million for this car. And there's a lot of bubbling around for an SP2 right now, not necessarily the SP1, but the SP2, so some of that stuff is really hot, and those aren't that old, but I think there is a huge shift going on right now with the new stuff, like you're saying. A lot of stuff bubbling out there as far as, like you said, the 296 and SF90, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. I think that's a very interesting.
I mean, Julie and I, we've had used Ferraris and new Ferraris. I'm remembering how old I am now, for 25 years. And we've always tried to have at least one. It sounds snobby, but not all of them were great, so don't be jealous. Some of them I had to restore, mostly myself. But I'll tell you that there is a large percent of people in the Ferrari world that are being that are turned off because of the depreciation. And I have friends they're just not interested anymore, because before buying a Ferrari, you at least could have a financial loss-free experience. The same with GT Porsches. And there definitely is a change that's happening where people in the Ferrari world who are not true Ferrari enthusiasts, who are trying to make money, or at the very least were really sensitive to not losing money, they're definitely going other directions. And I'll tell you where they're going for sure. They're going to GT Porsches. That's what they're buying. And that's the reason Porsche just sat back in the tall grass and said, well, I think we can raise our prices. And guess what? It's working. So that's my perception. I'm sticking it out with Ferrari. But also, Greg, you mentioned the cost of those previously, the high-end hypercars, the real special Ferraris. So no one knows for sure, but what I've been told by our dealer principal is that in order to be even considered for the top tier Ferrari, you have to have all the previous hypercars in your collection. You have to have a collection. So the standards, because there's so many people that want Ferraris and there's so many people that can afford Ferraris anymore, that it's really creating a lot of demand, obviously, for people trying to quickly build a collection so they can get the ultimate car. And really those high end, those you know, the Enzos and the LaFerraris and the F50s and the F40s and all these, they really have proven actually out to be pretty damn good investments. I don't know, Greg, that would actually be an interesting analysis for you to find out over the last, say, 20 years, well, 10 years, let's say, how those Ferrari hypercars actually beat the S&P 500.
Yeah.
Because that's the difference that I experience is what a lot of these guys will do is they're looking at them. And I don't personally feel this, and it doesn't really work for me because I like to drive cars, but I respect the fact that they like to own them. They have appreciation for them, but they're not really what I would call an enthusiast. They're more collectors. Like you try to talk to them about their cars, unlike Porsche GT guys, for the most part, are car nerds. The Ferrari guys, when you start talking to them, you can tell they're not that comfortable talking about the car itself because they don't really know anything about it, or they know very, very little about it. Even my friends who you would think would have a high level of knowledge about them, they don't know jack, which is kind of surprising to me. It's a totally different, experience, but I'm not judging it. It is what it is.
Before we get off Ferraris, can I give you guys a Ferrari trivia question?
Uh-oh. Give it to Paul because I want to watch him struggle because he'll miss it for sure.
Exactly. No, for both of you. So I pulled just some valuation data for 1990s Ferraris. Now, this isn't the F40s, F50, it's not none of the hyper stuff. This is more of your baseline. So I'm going to give you 4 cars. Tell me which one increased in value the most over the last 12 months, okay? Let's see, 1990 360 F1, 355 GTS, 348 GTS, and Mondial T. Now, I'll give you a hint.
Appreciated. You didn't say whether the 355 was an F1 or if it was a manual. Paul, I got us on this one. And
he said it was F1. He said it was F1.
No. He said the 360 was an F1. So I know it's not.
They're all F1s. Yeah, except for
they're all F1s. Oh, you're making them all F1s.
I mean, my answer is the Mondial T because I love them. That's one of the few Ferraris I love. But I just think that they were so cheap that they had only one direction to go.
Let's ask the Ferrari expert now.
Well, not an expert. I'm gonna think. So it was a 360, a 355, a 348, or a Mondial, right?
Yes.
The 348 will obviously be a manual.
I know.
Yes.
I know.
But if it's a good car, it's not a U.S. car because I think the U.S. cars or North America ones, we didn't get the good 348, and I think until they were all spiders. I'm pretty sure.
Damn, son there showing us that he knows some stuff about Ferraris. That guy's been, sandbagging us, knowing that 348s were always manuals. We had one of those too. Sounded great, but whew, don't get that bad boy in a turn. All right, let me think. If I had to guess, I'm actually inclined to, no, I'm going to go with a 348.
All right, so I'll do a lowest to highest here. Minus 4%, latest 12 months, 355 GTS. Plus 2.7%, 360 F1. And I'll just go with number 1. Plus 26.1%, Mondial T.
and actually, that was one of those cars that had a crappy first half, and then halfway through production became better, and the T's were actually decent cars. And I look at them because for a long time, like you could get a GTB version for, I don't know, under 30. I don't think you can touch them for under 50 now for a decent one.
For future evaluation trends, just, the lower the base price, the higher the swings, right? So, but you should change that picture behind you there, Paul. You should put some Ferraris back there.
Yeah, I'll just block it.
So Paul had a fun question. It was a couple weeks ago, and I think it's a good place to, ask this question. Are people buying vintage cars for the wrong reason? You asked that a couple weeks ago, Paul. I really like that question. I've been thinking about it a lot, to be honest with you. Probably too much. But are people buying them for the wrong reason? So when you thought of that question, what did you mean by it?
I would say since the last 4 years, before 2020, the people who come to me buying a Porsche, they seem to have a focus on what they thought they were going to use it for. And now, I don't know, through social media or boredom or lifestyle, imagining what their lifestyle will be, it's sort of like groupthink. They want a Porsche, but when I ask them specifically why they seem so adamant that I want this particular one. And I ask them, what do they want it for? Why do they want it? And most of them alarmingly have no idea. Like I want certain cars, albeit for the wrong reason. But once I get it, I'm like, oh, now I know how it fits my lifestyle. I know what to do with it. And these people, I ask them, and it's like deer in headlights. I'm like, so what did you want this? Why do you want a 993 C2S?
Oh, don't get going on 993s. We've
I
heard that
know.
before.
But I would say 993s and 964 new buyers are the number one for just not knowing why they want a car. And I think it's just sort of this like, death by a thousand cuts, social media and all the different stuff around them promoting that. And they suddenly want it until I ask them why they want it. And they don't really have a clue. And to me, it's okay to want it because you just always, nostalgia, or you always love the design. There's some kind of anchor point, but to just sort of be blind, like, I'll drive it on the weekend. Like even their answers sound like they came from social media, like
It's really interesting because I could totally see that with Porsches. I do not totally see that with like a 65 Mustang. I think if someone's going after a 65 Mustang, they just love the car, I do think, yeah, Porsches, there's a status thing attached to that. I'm sure any of the European, whatever, Bentleys, Rolls Royce, Ferraris, you name it, there's probably a part of that, but if someone's going after a 66 Barracuda, it's because they love 66 Barracudas. They're not investing in it. They have some good memory about that car. That's a interesting point for sure.
I got a great question.
They're probably nostalgic too, probably.
Yeah, I think that's 85% of it, probably.
So I heard Jay Leno say something yesterday, which I really liked. He said a Porsche 911 is expensive but not rare. It's interesting, isn't it? Because they made over 1 million of them, I mean, how many F bodies and G bodies did they make? Do you have any idea, Paul? How many F bodies they make? You had two of them right behind you.
I would say, that's from 64 to 73, probably worldwide, 50,000 total
You
of all.
think it's really? That's all? I'm surprised, actually.
I mean, like for instance, like a 7911 E coupe that we have, there's like 1,400 made for the US. But then they made another 2,000 Targas, and then they made, then you have the S, and the Targa and the coupe, and when you add them all up, it's probably 50,000. But the thing is, besides them being kind of like cockroaches where you can't kill them, really the only death to a long hood is rust. So if they can make it past the first 10 years of existence, they generally live. And the irony is, when people come to me asking about how hard it is to take care of an early 911, like they don't know how lucky they are in terms of support, from mechanical support, parts support, factory support. I mean, every time I venture away from Porsche, I go, oh my gosh, this is what you have to live with to find support for the cars. I mean, it's so easy to own any Porsche for that matter, in terms of support. Not
That's
inexpensive, but easy.
I don't know a lot about American cars. This would be a Greg question, but I would venture a guess that similar support's also available for a lot of the American cars. But can you guys think of another car that's, that's called a vintage car that's not rare but expensive? That's, like a Porsche 911. Is there any parallel to it? Because I can't think of one.
Well, one car that always surprises people, it's in the world of supercars and high-end $1 million plus cars, the Gullwing there's quite a few Gullwings, 300 SL Roadsters, Ferrari F40s. So if you're looking strictly at, that's a lot of number. Like if you look at, all right, what are the cars that cost $2 to $3 million or $1 to $3 million, and look at the production numbers, the Mercedes will pop as, wow, there's a lot of those for that price, that made that value level. F40 is the same. I mean, you look at an F40, then you go to the F50. F40, I think there's 1,900 or something like that. F50s, there's 349. You know?
Well, so you're bringing up a really good point, and I'm sorry to jump on, but I was writing some notes down to reinforce what you're saying. So they made over 1 million 911s. So I'm right, Paul? I mean, it's over 1 million altogether. So that's obviously not 1,500. And I can't think of another car like that they made 1 million, maybe a bug, but I don't know. I mean, it's just a bizarre little weird nine. And I think Paul's hit it nail on the head because there's so much support out there. You can buy all the parts, and you can buy them obviously NOS, or you could buy reproduction parts. But so Greg, to what you were just saying, when it comes to what a collectible car is, and this actually ties back into a lot of the Ferrari stuff and the Porsche GT stuff too. What is the total production of a car where it no longer is collectible? Like what is is it 600? Is it 1,500? Bruce Canepa and I had an informal conversation. I think I mentioned this before, where I was interested in a 964 RS, and this actually was at the Amelia auction. And I had never driven one, and he'd been driving one extensively, a maritime blue one, if I remember correctly. And he said, I asked him what he thought about the price on that one in particular that ended up selling for 350, and this was back in 2018 or 19. This was back in 2019. Anyway, he said they made a lot of them. That's all he said. And they made a lot of them. They made 3,500 of those cars. So that's a lot. I mean, 3,500 is a lot. And when you look at some of these new limited edition Ferraris that come out, they're making those in the same quantity, 3,000, 5,000. The Ferrari Pista, for example, we had one of those, and we had a very early delivery of one. And then I think rumor has it they made 6,000 of those cars. Is that a rare car? 6,000, is that rare? So what's rare? Like what's truly, does it have to be numbered? I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing.
I mean, I think Lamborghini might fall into that too. I mean, when you talk about from Gallardo era newer, I mean, there seem to be, at least where I'm at, ubiquitous. Aventadors, Huracans, they're still expensive, relatively expensive, and they're plentiful. I don't know about how they hold their values. I mean, ironically, a Countach is our logo, and I've never sold a Lamborghini.
Well, I don't know. For me, like 500 is a really good number because once you get below 500, it's really special. If it's over that, I think then you get into transmissions, color choices, so I think you can still find that. But I mean, I was just trying to Google real quick. Everybody went crazy on these Dodge last call naturally aspirated Mopars. I think they had 7 versions or something. I mean, I'll go to collections where they got like one of each. I'm like, this goes to an earlier question. It's like, what is collectible? And I had someone reach out to me the other day. He's looking at 4 cars. One of them is a Dodge Challenger 1970, but it's not anything special. It's a V8 car. Another one is a new Mopar, the 170, the one that the drag strip, the last Hellcat or Demon. And then he's looking at a fake Cuda, and the other one's a 67 Corvette. And he's like, well, which one's investment grade? I'm like, well, that's a really, okay. So I'm like, if it's investment grade, rip out anything that's not real. If it's a fake CUDA, even no matter how good it is, rip it out. If it's not done factory correct, rip it out. And I said, like the 170, that's a cool car, but you probably have to wait 10 years because you're paying a premium right now to get it, maybe 5. But, they made a lot of them. I'm not quite sure. I'll find out. But, it's not like you're saying.
Those are pretty cool cars. I've never driven one, but I bet you those are a barrel of monkeys,
Oh, they're yeah, awesome.
They're a hoot. So kind of rounding the bend, do you guys perceive in your market, and again, you guys are both ends of the market, and I can only speak from an enthusiast perspective. So I know my answer, but I want to hear what you guys say. Are you perceiving that a large percent is the market for enthusiast collector cars, the vintage stuff, is it growing, or are just the existing buyers just adding new things? And I know you guys are going to say, well, the baby boomers and all the rest of that are going to the big car garage in the sky. And we can just, so is that segment growing? Is it bringing in new buyers, or are those people just getting new interests and then shuffling the old cars out? Or, and this is a theory I've had for a while, or are we seeing the millennials and the younger kids, I can say that now, are they starting to say, I don't want that new whatever, I want to buy the cool vintage whatever? And I'm just curious what you guys are perceiving from just out and about. And Paul, why don't you start with that? Because you're all over Southern California, which is really the heart and soul of, the collector car world, at least in the United States. What are you perceiving?
I mean, and I would say part of it I'm biased because I deal mostly with enthusiasts and less of the collectors. I would say for sure the enthusiasts are growing. I think the younger market is growing. The 40 something and younger. There was a Harity article I read, came out last year sometime. But under 40 exceeds 27% share of the overall collector market and growing.
Hmm.
And they're buying cars that are, and I had written down like why I thought they were buying cars and a couple articles, but it was price, performance, usability. And I would add to usability events, which might be tied into usability. So these are people that a little bit of nostalgia, when I was a kid, I wanted a 993 or a 996 GT3 or whatever it is like that, a little bit of that. But, when they look at the cars that they chose, they're overwhelmingly Japanese and German. And I
Huh.
think it's because one, a little bit of relatability, two, availability, the price, and the only Porsche that made their top 10 list was a 944, which I've been preaching for a while because it is they're so cheap for what you get and the entry into so many different events. You're seeing a lot of 944s become safari cars because then you just buy a crappy one for 10 grand and lift it, and the things you could do with it is insane. And then of course on the other German cars are BMWs E36, and they skip E46 and E90. And I've said for years like E90 M3s are just too cheap. They're such
Those are the
good.
V8s, right?
The
Those are the ones with
V8s,
the V8s.
only
Yeah.
one with the V8. They're relatively light. They make great power, great sound. And I think a lot of the reason I think younger people and enthusiasts are gravitating to cars like this is not only are they usable from events, they can do some rallies, they can drive on group drives. It's not about top performance. They're relatively cheap, easy-ish to maintain, but they're super available, and it's not hard to get one.
Paul, is this somebody who would have otherwise or might be cross shopping, at least considering a newer car? Like, is this somebody that's taking themselves out of the new car market and buying the vintage car?
Oh, I think so. I think they're looking at, okay, if you want a new performance Japanese car, you can call it a new Supra, the Z. I mean, they're all 50 grand. Or you go to the FRS, and those are great cars. I mean, those are literally the modern 944, and those are 30 grand, but they're kind of underpowered. You want a Corolla GR, they're close to 50 grand. Everything's 50 grand. You can go get an E90 M3 for in the 30s, 20s, really in the 20s. E36 M3s in the 20s, 944s in the 20s. So they're half the price. They're cooler. You're not just I've got another one of these new cars, but you've got something. It's also not. I think price wise, it's not like they're going to make money. It's just they're not going to appreciate in their mind. The
Yeah.
Tell
value.
you what, okay.
No, no, go
I was
ahead.
yeah, I did a video of Enthusiast Auto Group yesterday, which if you don't know is one of the premier, BMW places. They're here in Cincinnati. Great guys. I did a walking video. We all like Spike's car radio. Paul Zuckerman's car was in there. One of I think 13 Sahara Dakar yellow, E39 M5, 640 miles. This thing is stunningly beautiful. But, that car is an outlier. E39s you got a really nice one for 50 or 60 grand. They have a red one there with 9,000 miles, and it's like 160 grand now, and it's just stunningly gorgeous. And they had one of the V8 cars there. And I talked about it. I said, everybody wants what's rare, what's one off, that's no longer made. You want the naturally aspirated. This is the generation we had a V8, and it was a very special color. I'm like, that's a rock star car right there,
Probably a Lime Rock edition.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It was a blue car. But go to the Collector Car Podcast YouTube channel, you can see it. Anyways, but getting back to just real quick, I looked it up. The 170 Demon, they're making 3,300 of those. That's not a rare car. Now,
No.
if you want a rare one, I found it for you. So the Frostbite Silver, they only made 46 of them, and only 8 of them had the demonic red leather interior. So great color combination. So that's one of 8.
I love that demonic red leather.
I know.
So
It's so bad.
that's the one to get if you're going to get a 170. Okay, don't get black. That's the most common color.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be rolling around with something that says demonic on the side, doing your school run, picking up your little girl when it says demonic on the side of your car, no, that's not for me. But yeah, I get it. Well, yeah, that's so from I'm seeing a lot of my friends that I've sort of grown up with that have been buying Ferraris primarily. I'm seeing them actually they're taking themselves out of the market and they're now gravitating towards the older cars. I probably have a group that mostly in the United States, but some over in Europe. And with the exception of maybe two or three, that's what they're all doing. And I'm not sure if this is a dalliance, like if they're just going to, test and see if they can get along with the older cars. But I know, because I know most of these guys fairly well, they're almost all business owners, all self-made, and they hate depreciation. It's hilarious too. They'll throw 50, 60 grand in some, restoration that they'll never get back when they sell it, but they just have some psychological thing with depreciation, which is, I don't know. I can't make heads or tails of it, but it's interesting.
No, I think you're right. We have a 328 GTS. As you know, I rarely get Ferraris. I sold this Ferrari in 2019. The guy who bought it, and I looked at my notes of all the people who were asking me about buying it back when I sold it in 2019. They were 50 plus years old, never had owned a vintage car, but had always wanted a Ferrari. And for them, a 308, 328 was not only relative, but it was affordable. And they would look at Mondial and they would run from fear. Same thing with 348, 355. So this was like the sweet spot. Now we get the exact same car back. The guy we sold it to on brand, never drove it, put 49 grand into making it as close to a new car because that's his only reference point is new car. And then he goes, this isn't for me because, it's an old car. And now I showed it yesterday to a guy and he's anecdotally the brand that I've dealt with for the last everyone calling me, which has a 430, wanted a newer car. The 430 was the newest Ferrari he could afford. He's doing a manual swap because he couldn't afford the manual swap and it's cheaper to do it, but it took a year of saving money. And now he's got that taste. He doesn't want a new Ferrari because I asked him, don't you want something newer? And even though it's not manual, and he's like, no, I don't want to deal with the depreciation. So he's looking at 308s, 328s. He briefly looked at Testarossas, but I think the ownership cost is, fear. 355s are over six figures, maybe a late 348, but he doesn't want a Spider. So he's sort of narrowed himself down to. So almost everyone who called me on that the 328 has a slightly newer Ferrari, wants to taste the older one, doesn't want to get killed on depreciation or maintenance.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, yeah, I get it too. Because, so one of you guys had a hard stop, didn't you? I don't want to be disrespectful of your schedules.
I'm still good for another 15 minutes myself.
All right. Well, unfortunately for you guys, I could talk for the next 10 hours about this stuff. But but I mean, it's obviously you guys are biased because you guys are in the car business and these are the types of cars you specialize in. But that said, you have a lot of, you talk to a lot of people obviously all day long about this type of thing. And you're picking up the same vibe that I am, that the cars have gotten so expensive and now the depreciation's entering back into the equation. And because the number's not small when it depreciates, it's more of a sting than people really, I think, they're surprised. And again, some of my friends that buy Italian cars and they're rolling into losing $100,000 within the first, 9 months, really. That's unusual. And they don't like that. And that's going to create, I think, an enormous upswing. And maybe this is what you guys are experiencing in the collector car world. Because they still want their enthusiast car. I mean, the guy listening to us right now is probably in his 40s or 50s. He's tinkering around with this car right now in his garage, detailing it, going on a rally, going on a drive. Maybe he's going out with Paul on Saturday or Sunday, the whole thing. He's getting ready to go meet up with Greg at an auction. Those types of people. Well, they're not going to necessarily be able to rationalize after they've worked all these years to be a successful dentist, walking into something where they're going to lose $100,000 when they can go buy one of, Paul's 911. So they can go have Greg represent them at an auction to buy something where they're going to lose no money. And there's a little bit of a weird thing that personally I've never seen in the car market. And I don't know if it's just a temporary thing or if this is a long-term trend. And Paul, you were talking about the fact that some of these older cars that people are buying, you know what, a car from the 90s, like what we were just talking about, those are really freaking great cars. I mean, there's a big difference between a 911, a G body, and then a 964, let alone a 993 or 996 or 997, right? There's a huge, but if you go back to 964s and 993s, those cars don't really, they kind of function like a modern car. You can drive one of those every single day. You could a G body or an older 911 too. So the idea that I have to sacrifice worrying about crappy brakes or not being able to keep up with a Camry on the freeway on ramp or all these other considerations, because the modern car, the what do they call it, modern classics are more modern maybe than they are classic. I think people are going to start making more decisions to buy some of the stuff, especially from the 90s. It's exciting, I think.
Well, yeah, I think the problem there will become parts availability, so
Yeah.
I think that's something that, like, I go back to international, the Scout, International Scout, those are cool. They never took off, a lot of different reasons, but they're cool looking. You got a convertible sport ute, but they never had the aftermarket supplier, in which to do well. And if you see there, that's changing, obviously. But like, I think there's a really sweet spot, call it 2000 to 2015. I don't want to say the last of the analog cars, because all cars are analog before like today kind of thing, but there's that sweet spot. And I actually pulled some numbers here. So I have a Boxster S 2005, got it for, had 2,000 miles on it. It's been in a collection since new. Absolutely love that car. I know it's the first gen of the next, and you shouldn't never buy the first 2 years of that new gen or whatever. Absolutely love that car. We'll never lose money on that car. I mean, that thing, because we got it reasonable. It's up to 3,000 miles. It's an S. It's a 6-speed. It's, So I just pulled 2005 Porsche valuation trends for the last 12 months. Boxster S, Carrera S, Turbo S, 2006 Cayman S. They were all exactly the same, flat. Which to me says now's the time to get them, because they're flat because they stopped depreciating, right? And the way things are happening already this year, I just think more and more people will be going after that generation of car, whether it's a Porsche or not. So get your 2005 Porsche now.
Well, I mean, but you know what? That was my next question. Of course, you have the script, so you know what I was going to ask next. But that is actually a really interesting, that's a perfect observation. And viewers, listeners, if you're interested in buying, and I agree, those mid-engine Porsches are freaking brilliant. They just are. And you can get one of those for what? Less than 20, but even less than 15 grand for something that's not a beater.
Yeah.
Oh, easily. Yeah, you can get a 987.1 Boxer, for under 20, Boxer S for under 20. Cayman a little bit more.
Tell me about, you guys tell me, so tell me about a 987 Boxster S for under 20. Okay. I have never owned one. So I want to know, what is that horsepower on that bad boy? What is the, like, what are I think one of the bearings in what are the things you got to look out for?
Well, I mean, but and I think the internet and also the proliferation of misinformation has kept the values down. With you'll hear people go IMS bearing, bore scoring.
Right.
When you get to the 987.1, the IMS bearings just rarely fail, and you can't replace them. They're inside the engine now. So Porsche, they won't admit wrongdoing in terms of, oh, we need a recall, but what they will do is masterfully fix it very quickly on the next edition. So the IMS bearing, almost a non-existent issue. But I would say bore scoring becomes a common thing. But when you start looking at it, it's where the cylinders basically start scoring because there's something going on, leaking in the cylinders. It's more rare than people think. It's usually misused cars, not warmed up, environments that have huge temperature swings. It's one of those things that I just think for the thousands of cars they made, it happened very, very rarely. But that kind of proliferation of misinformation has kept the value downs on all of the 987, 997.1 cars. And they're also magically, Porsches, when they get to 15 years old, in general, that's the sweet spot because no one cares. They're too
well. Let me ask you. So if I buy one of those things and I didn't have it checked out, I didn't do a PPI, and it turns out the motor is grenaded or whatever, that worst case scenario. And this is what I'm trying to get a sense of, because I know some people are like right now busily, on Auto Trader or on your website or looking at upcoming auctions that Greg's representing. They're looking for, okay, let me find this Boxster or this Cayman, right? worst case scenario, what is my carrying cost if, say, for example, the motor needs, you know,
The purchase price of the car, 20K.
Okay.
Right. That's
Okay.
what scares everybody.
Which rightly so, which then that's what pushes them. I mean, when you look at the prices of 997.2, 987.2, basically the 911 came in the second generation of, 2009 to 2012, you see the price jump like 30% for the same car. And they're fundamentally just not that different. And it's that fear. And I'm like, gosh, if you're looking at like a $20,000 Boxer S, like a '07 manual, and you go to a 2010, the same car, it's now 35,000 to 40,000, maybe more. So you look at
Seriously,
that
just because that fear of the bearing. Wow,
fear,
I did not
fear
realize.
of the bore scoring, the other mechanical things. So at that point, I'm like, gosh, these are so cheap. Just do your due diligence, get a good inspection. I have the one thing I say over and over. I don't think Porsche ever made a bad car, but they certainly attracted some pretty crappy owners.
Oh, all right, I can't top that. I'm not even going to try. I mean, back to the motor thing though, you could obviously buy a used motor from a boneyard or something like that, and obviously not have to spend 20 grand necessarily. But Paul, compare that to the price of restoring or see. I know it's a screensaver, but the two 911s, the F bodies behind you, like
Well,
to
yeah.
restore the motor on one of those bad boys, it's like what?
This guy bought the car at 19 from the original owner, needed some work, and 70 grand later, he didn't restore it, he refurbished it. 70 grand
70
later.
grand. Yeah. I saw
Yeah.
your pictures on your website. That car is gorgeous. I love the history. Actually, I don't know if we have time, but I'd really love to get drilled down because Paul, you spend so much time and Greg spends so much time really talking about the history of these cars. And I mean, the backstory. And I think that really does make a normal, F body 911, like your green one there, hearing the history of it, all the little silly things that happen, this person, that person, there is an emotional attachment to that thing that goes beyond just going to the dealership and buying a new car that I think everyone must feel. It makes the cars feel alive. Anyway,
I mean,
yeah,
and Jay Leno said that years ago. He goes, I don't want to buy a car with a story. I want to buy a car with a history.
yeah.
And
Right.
it's not like, because the Burgundy car was, the first owner took tourist delivery and she was the editor on the original Blade Runner. And I would have loved to have found more information. She had that car for 40 some years. And does that make it necessarily worth more? Marginally, it's a good car, but whoever buys it, they're going to now attach to, like, I'm now not just buying this inanimate thing, but like you said, it becomes alive. I am now truly the next caretaker. Like, that whole thing. I'm not the owner. I'm just, taking care of for the next owner.
At
And
the
that's
very least, you're going to become a Blade Runner fan for sure.
it's a boring movie.
It is boring. Yes. So before we end, whenever we're going to end, I do need your opinion on possibly swapping cars in my garage at some point.
Uh-oh, this will be good. Let's go for it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Sit on my couch and tell me about your mother.
So, I've got a 65 Hypo Fastback Mustang beater car, but a real K code, right? And I've got that unrestored 66 Pontiac GTO, and I would love to keep them both. I don't know if I'm a preservation car guy. Like that between the two right now, I probably let the Mustang go first. But the Mustang I can drive anywhere down dirt roads. It's a rare car, but it's fun. It's like an old pair of jeans. But the GTO is a much better driving, enjoyable car, and so I'm kind of going back and forth. Well, I texted you guys, a week ago or so about that collection I ran into, and I can't say too much about it. I will tell you two Porsches there. One of them was a 996 Turbo, like a medium silver blue with tan interior and like 1,400 miles on it. And okay. And so that's one car I would consider trading. The guy likes the GTO. So he's like, oh, maybe we'll do a trade. And I'm like, oh, that 996 pretty cool. And then he also had a 1990 Mercedes-Benz 190 with the 1.6, not an Evo car, but still with the 1.6 that was, I think, Porsche tuned. Four-door manual car with only 18,000 miles on it. Now, would you trade a 60s muscle car? Maybe not both of those, but at least maybe the 996. I mean, they're totally opposites, really. I don't know. Paul,
I would say that the Mercedes, if it was a 2.3 Cosworth, and I own two of those. I tried so hard to like them.
Paul, he said it's an Evo. It's not just a straight.
It's an Evo.
Not an Evo. No,
it's not an Evo. Oh, okay.
Visit the US.
All the motors were built by Cosworth. Okay, so it's a US.
US. If it was the European ones are significantly better and I think interesting, but it still comes back to the question I always ask my clients and friends, like, where do you not romantically think how you'll own it, but how would you really, really use it? The 996 Turbo, it is a Swiss Army knife. It does everything really well. I think a lot of people cross shop them with GT3s, which always shocks me because they are a GT car for sure.
Right.
And you could daily drive a 996 Turbo. I would say the only thing which I'm shocked more people don't talk about is the manual transmission on those in first and reversed. Like if you try to launch a 996 Turbo manual, you'll either fry the clutch or stall it. There's something weird about that early, but outside of that, they just work great.
Okay, I know the Mercedes is a manual, but we're assuming that the Porsche is a manual. Was it a manual, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the only downside is you'll pay a lot for that odometer, and they're not that rare. And you'll, between an 1,800 mile one, let's just say that one's in the six-figure range, or you can go get a 50,000 mile one for half the price.
Right. Right.
Porsche, like you can drive 100,000 mile 996 Turbo, and you will not know the difference between that and the low mile ones. I mean, and I think those motors are going to be million mile motors. I mean, they're going to go a lot.
Greg, did you drive either car?
No. This is theoretical right now because it wasn't until I was leaving. He's like, maybe we'll trade for that. You do some sort of trade, and I'm like, oh, interesting.
So I'll give you my opinion, and I'm not American muscle car guy. I keep your GTO. I wouldn't get rid of the GTO.
Okay.
Get rid of it. Unless you're so over it. Well, I've heard you wax poetic about this thing like 10 times. I mean, you talk about this GTO more than Paul talks about his hatred for 993s. There, I said it. Okay. So, I mean, you really, I've learned a lot about American cars just for hearing you talk about your GTO, the story behind it, the labels, how original it is, and all the rest of it. And there's other cars you talked about. I've driven a 190s and the one we're talking about, and I've driven 996s. This is just a play car for you, and you really obviously have passion for the GTO. Unless you're over it, I'd keep the GTO. And probably the GTO is going to be, if we're going to talk about values over long term, I think Paul said it right with the 996. They made too many of them, and those Mercedes, those they're not that great to drive. Sorry, I mean they're just not.
The Euro ones are awesome. The regular Euro ones are great.
And the transmissions are really not good, honestly.
Yeah, they're a 5-speed, Getrag, dog leg, and they're just, like I said, I've driven one Euro one, and I was like, holy cow, we got the short end of the stick when it came to North America. Really became evident.
It's just like people that wax poetic about E30 M3s, and I love them, and they're gorgeous, and I want to get one. But that engine...
There's nothing there. Not until you get to a Sport Evo, which is 250 horsepower, like, oh, that's what they should have been.
But Paul, just Greg, to the point though, if you drive one of those cars and you're on the road, with the exception of the 996, the twin turbo, those cars are going to feel slow.
Yeah. So I can't tell you all the cars in the collection, but I'll give you a little teaser. I'll tell you one after we're not recording. 89 930, and it has like 2,500 miles, and it's dark green with tan interior.
All right, sold. Screw the GTO. Get that one.
Yeah, I mean those are dark. I'm a huge fan of 930s. Partly because I call them the thinking man's Porsche. Like you can't drive that and just be disconnected on the phone. Like you're thinking about RPMs, what gear to be in, how to shift, especially the 4-speeds, which are unloved, but I think are like really what that car is about. I know, the 5-speed. And ironically, when you drive the 89, which is the only 5-speed, which adds almost 100% value to it. And the irony is the part that people don't like about 4-speed is kind of the same in the 5-speed, which is a tall first and a tall second. You think, oh, that's going to solve the problem. and you have to get really good at matching revs, coming around a right-hand turn and going into first gear, which feels very unnatural for anyone who drives a manual.
Right.
But when you look at 930s, sadly the value is tied into the odometer and the color and the rarity. But that was Porsche's halo car. When you talk to mechanics who take those things apart, I mean, the amount of technology and robustness that went into those cars is insane.
I'm going to see if I can turn my camera for a second. I've got a rare 930 dealer poster on the wall here that I got when I bought this collection. See if you can see this thing.
Oh yeah, see that's right there. That's the poster. I had that in my room. Something very similar to that.
Apparently, it's really rare. So
yeah,
one of one.
Well, but so Greg, I know one of you talk about a G body, wide body cabriolet sometimes as being a great cruiser car.
Not a
You
cab.
should drive one.
Well,
not
I would prefer not a cab, but yeah.
Okay. Well, you should drive one of those because again, I had a 964 that we did a light restoration on, and we've had the G bodies and all the rest of the thing. And in era, they were great, but you got to wrap your mind around if you're going to drive one of those that they just are not keeping up with modern traffic. And sometimes you have to really be aware of what you're getting into. Now, personally, I'm fine with that, but I think that's going to be a surprise for a lot of people. But when you step up to the turbos, those are doing just fine. Like your 996 twin turbo, that's 400 horsepower. No problem whatsoever. Not a heavy car. And the later 996s were built incredibly well. I love those cars personally. We had a 2000, we had a GT3, a yellow one, speed yellow one. It was an 04. Damn, that car was fun to drive. But I mean, you guys know what GT stands for, by the way? And when you say GT car, don't.
I know. In Porsche world or in general?
No. What does it stand for? Oh, I got you.
Gran Turismo.
Oh, he got it. Damn it. Or Grand Touring in American language. Yes, I know.
Right, but the GT3s were after the race class, and I don't know if the racing used the same, if it stood for Grand Touring.
Yeah, it was different. Yeah. All right, cool. Well, so listen, guys, I would like all of us to talk about what car events you're going to, and for the rest of this year. Auctions, Porsche events, obviously Ferrari events, because there are so much. I was looking online. Julie asked me to write a list of the things I wanted to do this year. And she asked me like a month ago, and I'm still writing the damn list. And now it's picking one over the other. So you guys are all seasoned car event attenders. I am as well, but I want to know what your list is. And so on the next show, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the absolute must attend annual, like the ones that you don't mind going to every year. Like Car Week's an easy one, but maybe at Car Week, you're a little bit done with the quail and you want to spend more time over at, something else, things like that. I'd love to have that conversation with you guys. Yeah, so that's fun. Any closing thoughts for everyone? I mean, if you had to buy one car right now, and it's going to be a car that as we roll into next year, it's going to giving you the most pleasure, the most fun, and even at least held its value, if not appreciated in value, given what you guys see happening in the market right now. And look at Greg; he's going to look at his RM auction results and tell us something they made $1 billion. He's going to cheat. Whenever he looks away at his computer, he's looking at auction results. But no, it is a curveball, but something that's reasonably priced. Let's say $75,000 or less, or even $50,000 or less. You've got to buy it. You got to buy it. What would it be? And Paul's going to go last because he's going to choose one of his cars that he has for sale.
No, I won't. It's one of the cars I'm waiting to get in, but no, I'll just really quick. I look at the values. I just think everyone's sleeping on 991.1 coupe manual anything. They're cheap. They're really cheap.
What's the price? It's cheap.
Like you can get 991.1 base, like a Carrera S manual coupe with like 40,000 miles in the 60s.
Wow.
Like, so cheap. And the 0.2s are like 30 grand more. And it's not like the 997 thing where there is a major mechanical thing. I keep looking on the forums, like why these are so cheap, but they're cheap.
Why are they? What is I'm trying to think in my head. What was the major difference?
It's the last normally aspirated flat six engine that's not in a GT car. Like everything after that's twin turbo, which doesn't seem to mind. Yes, the other ones are more tunable. I mean, the only thing I can see wrong with them is the door panels like to come apart, kind of BMW 90s style. And they have a few of these like shunts that direct, I forget what they're called. And there's like 7 of them, and it's $4,000 to replace them all if they need them. But other than that, they really are great cars. They drive amazing, and they're so cheap. I mean, if you have a $70,000 budget, you can get a lot of choices. And those cars you could use daily. You could take on the track. You could go in the mountains. You
Do
can
those
drive.
cars age like the older hand-built Porsches though? Because those cars are more assembly line. So if I get one of those with 70 or 100,000 miles on it, I mean, what am I looking at? Am I looking at just like a nice used car, or is it going to be something that'll last another 100,000
Oh,
miles?
I think the last, because I think they're, when you really look at them compared to like a 997.2 that seems to be on this pedestal, you look at them and they are really made well. And I've seen ones now with over 100,000 miles. The interiors have definitely held up better, for sure. And they're
Awesome.
light. They're like 3,000 pounds still. You can get one for like they're 3,100 pounds. They're still light cars generally.
To show you I'm not cheating, I'm going to pick a car that has never been sold at an auction, or at least not an arm Sotheby's auction. I'm going to pick the first gen BRZ.
Oh, he's always tricky. Got to keep an eye on that, Greg.
Manual, rear wheel, Toyota reliability. We're talking under 20 grand. I should go get one now. Here's
those
I
are
got a
actually
2015 for 16.5,
Yeah.
66,000 miles on it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's the car to have.
Yeah, that's the new Miata. You know, the answer is Miata. That's it.
I got you guys both beat. You'll be embarrassed you didn't think of this. Ready? And it's not a Porsche, Paul, so you could stop smirking. BMW M Coupe.
Oh,
Yeah,
there's,
see, I
there's
win.
one back there.
Is it really an M Coupe? What color is it?
It's my race car. I've had it since new. It
Uh,
hasn't moved since 16. It's under the cover.
So
Wow.
these cars were made in South Carolina. South Carolina. People thought they were ugly when they were made. They look kind of like they have actually, Greg, you might want to look in one of those. Those are kind of badass. The US
Clown
one,
shoe?
the clown shoe, right?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
But I mean, the US ones had 240 horsepower, but in the later, shit, I don't remember what year, they had 321 horsepower.
2001.
Oh my gosh. That's an
2001.
E46 M3 motor, 321 horsepower. And it's when you look at them, we had a 240 horsepower one, which my wife hated, which I should have kept, but you know, wife or car. So, you know, choices. Anyway, so you look out the mirror and you can see the back fenders, just like it was on a 930 turbo. Those cars are so freaking cool.
No, you're right.
They made a shit ton of them. The parts aren't expensive. The whole thing. I think that's going to be a really special car long term because BMW, no one will ever make a weirdo car like that again.
Well, and to one step further, I love those. I own one. I've had it since new, but the Z4M Coupe, and that's what I should have said. The Z4M Coupe, the best Bangle designed M Coupe, and no one cares. They're actually really pretty. They're super fun to drive. They got benchmarked against the Cayman, so they got their asses wiped. But the butt dyno on the Z4M Coupe is way more fun than a Cayman.
That's
And
a lot
like,
of that's a lot of butt analogies in a very short period of time.
I know, but it's
Yeah.
it was I mean, you can go get a Z4M Coupe manual for just a high level driver for 30 grand, low 30s.
What's
All
the
the
motor?
watch-
Paul, what's the motor?
It's the E46, the S54 motor. So it's the 300.
Oh.
And it actually makes more power. The interior is massively improved, and they're cheap. You know what? I scrape my answer. If I could go back, if I was gonna, and I've actually need to sell a couple cars, but Z4M Coupe is on my list. 991.1 manuals on my list, because those two cars are asleep. And the Z4M Coupe, they made less of those than the Z3M Coupe, and no one really cares. And I
Wow,
think
I didn't know that.
So
Yeah,
start looking at Z4M Coupes.
I might change, and those do look fantastic. Actually, that's a great looking design. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
I love the M3s. Or the previous generation. But when I was at EAG this week, there was a silver one there. I yelled out, "A clown shoe! We got to look at the clown shoe!" And turns out it was like one of their tech mechanic guys. So it was kind of a beater, but it's in the video too. Such a cool car.
All right, cool. Hey guys, thank you for your time today. So listen, next show, let's make sure we bring our must-attend events. And listen, listeners, if you have any topics, we like to bounce around and talk about a lot of different things because we're primarily car enthusiasts that maybe dabble in collector cars. Well, these guys do for a living, but you get the gist of it. Any ideas, any suggestions, anything you'd like us to focus on? You heard Paul talking about some of the inherent problems that are maybe maybe not a problem after all on some of those Porsches. Maybe we talk more about that. Maybe we talk more about driving experiences in, Europe and whatever you guys want us to talk about, go to our Instagram page. And it's obviously Full Throttle Talk, and just direct message us and let's get some input from you, what you want us to focus on. We love talking about all these things. We want to get more guests on. We probably should, because I think a lot of people are going to want to hear about financing some of these collector cars. I know nothing about that. That might be something we should talk about on a future show. Yeah, so thank you for listening, and we really appreciate your continued loyalty to Full Throttle Talk. We'll talk with you on the show next week.